The Wild Beyond the Witchlight is my most favorite module of the 5e lineup. Very bold to say, I know, but there is a lot of reasons for that. It has got awesome roleplay opportunity. It has awesome exploration of this fantastical land. It has amazing combats, but funnily enough, the combats are purely optional. But we'll be getting into that in a moment, because we will be going over spoilers, so players that plan on playing in this excellent module do not watch this. But DMs that want added insight as I give a review and overview of this module, go ahead and stick around because we are going over the whole thing. So with all the players gone, let's dive in. This book details out in 5 chapters the wonderful carnival that is the Witchlight Carnival and the land of Prismeer. In the carnival, your players can get into a whole bunch of fun games and shenanigans, and then eventually your players dive into Prismeer, a fey little domain of delight. But things are no longer delightful, as there is a coven of hags that have taken over and are ruining and running this place. The brief overview of this adventure is that your players are going to go to the Witchlight Carnival, have some fun, and then dive into this land where they'll combat the forces of the hags and eventually free Zybilna, the once ruler of this domain, and they will save the day. Very brief synopsis, but there's a lot more nuance to it. There's a lot more finagling going on, and there is a lot more fun times to be had. The great thing about this adventure is that your players show up and they are truly not going to know what's happening, because if you've only ran out of the 5e lineup, they've never ran into anything like this before. And to really help drive this going to the Feywild, there's actually some really great hooks right there in the intro. One of them consists of your players interacting with a warlock, and the warlock actually has a patron in the form of Zybilna, and the warlock will say, "Hey, I haven't heard from Zybilna in a while. Can you guys go to Prismeer?" Another great hook, and one of my most favorite hooks here, is the fact that you could show up to the Witchlight Carnival when you were kids, but something went missing. Something got stolen. And that stolen thing, whether that be an item, a trinket, could in fact be in the hands now of this coven. And you are now going to Prismeer to take back what was stolen. There's a lot of great hooks there, but most important of all is the fact that when your players show up, they will want to explore. When they show up to the Witchlight Carnival, they want to play in those games, they want to earn those prizes, and then eventually they dive into the land of Prismeer, and that is when all the crazy shenanigans go down. So in Chapter 1, we get the Witchlight Carnival, a ton of fun games and prizes, and a whole bunch of NPCs to interact with, and I do mean a ton. This place is absolutely jam-packed with them, and the really great thing about this is this does something that I want to see from every adventure here on out, is the fact that when you interact with these people or play in these games, you will have these moments where you do something, and that will correspond to something you do later on in the adventure. A perfect example of that being the snail races. You do the snail races, and then you know how to interact with snails better. And then later on in the adventure, that'll give you advantage on an animal handling check with snails. And then there's goblin wrestling, and that can show up later on. You get singing lessons by doing a little quest, and learning how to sing better is going to help you later down the line, etc., etc. You're going to have a bunch of these little quests and mini games, and you can totally have the fun thing of a little pop-up in the corner there saying, "Oh, that'll be useful later." That is such a fun, unique mechanic, and I love it. So in the Witchlight Carnival, your players are moving around, doing a whole bunch of various things, and there's a fun little mechanic tied to this as well, where your players can either make the Witchlight Carnival happier, or they can make it sadder. And the reason for that is because they want to interact with the 2 owners of this establishment, Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. Your players need to get to Prismeer, but they are the only ones that are going to show your players the way. Your players have to do something outstanding in order to get their attention. So, if you have a whole bunch of good aligned characters, maybe they'll go around and do a whole bunch of fun, good things, and maybe they'll bring so much joy that one of them will be crowned the Witchlight Monarch. But if you've got a group that does a whole bunch of fun, nefarious things, then maybe they can bring down the party, and maybe they could even try and steal something precious to Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, in which case the 2 will be forced to show the players the way. So Chapter 1 is just an absolute delight. It's an absolute fun time. And then we go on to Chapter 2. Once your players have coerced Mr. Witch and Mr. Light to showing them the way to Prismeer, that is when they hop on in. And the first thing they will uncover is a terrible, mucky swamp. They have arrived in Hither. Hither is a swamp owned by Bavlorna Blightstraw, a frog-like hag who is now running this place. As your players explore around Hither, they could be accosted by some Herringon thugs, and maybe they'll interact with a whole bunch of other fun, zany, weird characters too. Something to note about all three of the locations in Prismeer, Hither, Thither, and Yawn, is that it details out the hag's lair, whether that be the HUD or their mansion or their workshop. But in addition, there's a whole bunch of fun encounters that your players can get into on the side when they're moving from location to location. Tons of fun little unique encounters, and they will interact with a whole bunch of various people. So it's important to note as well, when this book came out and during all of its marketing, they explicitly stated that you can get through this adventure without any combat, which is technically true. Your players, if they're so choosing, could intimidate, persuade, sneak around, and use a whole bunch of guile and trickery to get out of a whole bunch of combats, which is extremely unique in 5th edition because a lot of the adventures we get, you go into the next room and you have to fight these monsters in your repeat process. But the thing to consider is, with all the land of Prismeer, everyone is operating on certain rules. Everyone is operating on the rules of hospitality, ownership, and reciprocity. Between these three rules that everyone operates on, there is a sort of tension that goes on, because some monsters may want something from the party, whether that be some item or some piece of information or whatever. But at the same time, they're not going to just straight up go and try to murder the party, because murder is boring. They might try and fight the party, but the party can try and talk them down, or the party could just relinquish it. The party can do a whole bunch of various things. This really does lean in on a heavy RP style game, which I totally love, and I know a lot of people are going to love. But like I said before, if you want a combat game, then I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of fun combats, a lot of unique encounters, a lot of great things. And it doesn't also devolve into the PCs needing to murder everything. The PCs can just beat up on whatever they're fighting and they're good to go. Like I said before, the Herringon gang. The Herringons want something from the party, but they're not going to try and murder the party, so hopefully the party doesn't try and murder them. So in the land of Hither, we interact with Herringon folk. We meet a Sir Talavar, a fairy dragon who is trying to escape and try and get to the Sealy court. We find a whole bunch of other unique creatures as well. But the most intriguing of all is a court of bullywugs who are pretending to be French aristocrats. And the funniest part about all this is leadership doesn't last long. If there is a king in order, then the king usually gets killed, and then a new king takes their place. It's quite hilarious. In fact, as your players arrive, they'll be in the middle of what could potentially be a coup, and your players could potentially choose sides, or maybe they'll try and make themselves king. I know, gosh darn well, that a lot of groups are going to step in and say, oh yeah, we're going to definitely be the kings now, because that's what players do. In the location of this soggy court of bullywugs, in the center of it, that is where your players are going to find Bavlorna Blightstraw in all of her croaky eminence, and there your players will be interacting with her. Maybe they'll just try and beat her up, or maybe they'll use some subterfuge, because the best part about this adventure is we have these big bads. We have the Coven of Hags, but they are not together. They are separated. And the best part about this is your players could potentially try and fight them one after another, but another fun aspect of this is the fact that all of the hags hate each other and or know each other's secrets. So throughout this adventure, your players could meet one hag and try and get the dirt and info on another one, and then use that to their advantage and then move on to the next hag. And we can see this fun subterfuge of all of the hags trying to backstab one another, and your players can just throw themselves into the mix. Now, once your players have wrapped up in Hither, it is time to move on to the next location, which is Thither. They will get there by escort of a scarecrow, Clapperclaw, who is eager to help out the party, even though they are totally working for the hags. But that's part of the charm of this, is the fact that everyone can help out the party, theoretically. So now your players find themselves in Thither, where they'll find all this wooded area. Players will interact with Willow the Woods, a child who is leading the getaway gang, who are kids that are escaping the clutches of the terrible hag that lives in Thither, Scabatha Nightshade. Scabatha is essentially operating a workshop and employs a whole bunch of kids who don't seem to age. Your players can help fight against this tyranny, but also important is the fact that along the way through Thither, your players can interact with a unicorn. This unicorn weaves a terrible tale that the unicorn's mate was killed, and unfortunately, the horn was stolen. Unicorn horns are going to be extremely important later on because your players are going to have to use a unicorn horn in order to free Zybilna. There are 2 horns in this adventure, one of which is, of course, on the unicorn your players are going to interact with, and the other one is located somewhere else, and hopefully your players can find it. But the unique thing is, as your players go to interact with this unicorn, that is when they're going to get interrupted by a blast from the past. The League of Malevolence. These are villains that are supplementary to this adventure, and your players will have dealings and interactions with them as well. There is a lot of fun interactions with potential bad guys, and that's what I love about this adventure, is that you can have regular encounters with the bad guys and doesn't always have to boil down to combat. Sometimes always striking first, striking whenever you see a monster gets real old real quick. That is what makes this adventure truly stand out. Once your players have interacted with Scabbeth the Nightshade, whether they beat her up, or they try and free the kids, or they try and do something, that is when it's time to move on to the third area of Prismeer, Yawn. With Hither we had a swamp, with Thither we have a forest, and now with Yawn we've got a mountainous region. Your players will be diving into mines and interacting with even more strange creatures. That's another great thing about this adventure, is just all the unique NPCs and weird factions your players are going to be meeting. And it's just so much fun and a delight to be interacting with a whole bunch of strangeness. Eventually, after crawling your way through Yawn, your players will go to the Hag's location, which is a giant theater created on a hillside. And this is the Hag's little domain. And it's totally awesome. Your players can get themselves involved in a play, and they will meet up with a whole bunch of more zany, wacky characters, and they could potentially maybe get electrocuted or fall off the edge or something. There is just a bunch of crazy things with this. The hag that operates in this place is Endlin Moongrave, and she is one of the scarier ones of them all. She's got that little, puppet thing going on, pretty creepy. And this is just one of my most favorite places because of all the crazy, zany, wacky interactions your players are going to have here. Now, once your players have crawled their way all to these locations, that is when your players are going to have the courage to march on and make their way to the Palace of Heart's Desires, the Chapter 5 of this location, the grand finale. This location is awesome. It is a classic, large mega dungeon with a whole bunch of unique, awesome features. Your players are going to be interacting and seeing that this place is somewhat frozen in time. And there is a whole bunch of good people that are frozen, some of them even in midair, and it's totally awesome. But your players will also be interacting with a whole bunch of monsters and more of the League of Malevolence as they crawl around up and down this place. It's also got a fun Legend of Zelda aspect where your players can open up some doors, but they have to flip a switch and then more doors open, but other doors close again. It's totally awesome, really. And the fact that there's so much verticality and horizontalness to this location, it's just absolutely huge. But the thing is as your players explore around, at this point they will be a higher level because you level up relatively quick in this adventure. Even so, they will be going up against a lot of bad guys if they're going for a combat-y style. And very scarily enough is the Jabberwocky. Very, very scary monster that can totally frighten everybody and potentially just gobble them up. You don't want to be dealing with that. Once your players have learned that they can free Zybilna getting a unicorn's horn, they either have to find it or unfortunately they've got to take it from the living unicorn. And once they free Zybilna, then Zybilna can unleash her powers and save the day. Mind you, your players could theoretically kill the hags, but if they are active as a coven, it's probably going to be a little bit harder, and if the hags use the Jabberwocky to their advantage, then it's once again going to be extremely hard combat. But it's definitely doable. Like I said before, a whole bunch of weird, awesome, unique encounters here, and a whole bunch of combat encounters in the Palace of Heart's Desires, but once again, they don't all have to be combat. They could be subverted, they could all be ran away from, they could be interacted with to some various degree. And finally, at the grand finale, once your players have done it all, they've rescued all of Prismeer from the clutches of these evil hags and potentially freed Zybilna. Maybe they don't free Zybilna. That is when they can finally return home. And there's actually a pretty cute little ending there where if your players showed up as kids to the Witchlight Carnival and a whole bunch of things got stolen, then you could have it be where they go back to being kids again and it was almost like a dream, but not quite. I think that's a pretty awesome way to go about it, especially if you go with the beginning where all of the PCs had a sibling get stolen from these hags. I think that's a great way to end a cute and beautiful campaign. So like I said before, campaign's absolutely fantastic. It hits on all three of the pillars that I so love. It's got a beautiful location to explore. It's got a whole bunch of NPCs, dozens and dozens and dozens of named NPCs that your players will get to interact with and get to know and love. There's something really unique about this adventure in the fact that if your players are willing to be a traveling troupe, your players are actually going to pick up quite a lot of followers. They can pick up a lot of characters that are going to say, hey, can we join you? There is a ton of these characters. We've got a goblin who got ran over by a Jabberwock. We got a bullywug that was thrown in prison. We've got just so many unique characters here, and it's just absolutely lovable. So the thing is not only is it just awesome for the fact that it's got all this stuff, but there is some player character options as well. We are given both the Harrigan and the fairy races to use, and we also get some fun, unique backgrounds, which are totally awesome to use. You can be a Witchlight Carnival, and you could be lost and stuff. But importantly as well is, this book does what I assume and hope every single book does from here on out is, there are all these roleplay cards for every single one of the majorly named NPCs, and it details out what they're like and their ideals, bonds, flaws, and motivations and stuff. That is fantastic. Instead of having to flip through all these pages, instead of having to, remember exactly what everyone does, if you just have those NPC cards, that is absolutely the way to go. And I strongly, strongly encourage Wizards of the Coast to keep doing this stuff because it's awesome. Also really cool about this adventure is, even though it is only levels 1 through 8, you are punching up pretty hard. You are going up against some pretty awesome encounters, and there's a lot of fun magical items to be had in this adventure. In the beginning, your players get their hands on mundane little fun things, but later on, they're picking up some pretty heavy-duty gear, and it's totally cool. There's actually a Vorpal sword in this adventure, funnily enough. So for my overall review and overview of this adventure, I'm here to tell you that this adventure is great as a 5e adventure. This adventure is all about this high-octane, crazy high fantasy, pulpy, fun, just environment. This is not a gritty, hardcore, whatever. This is just a lighthearted, fun romp through a location. Methinks that if you run this thing purely as written and you go through maybe half of the random encounters, this is going to be a relatively quick adventure. You're not exactly doing too much, and more importantly, if you're not getting into combat, your game's going to be significantly shorter because, let's face it, 5e combat takes forever. So if you're running a game with minimal combat in it, then I believe that you're going to run through this adventure pretty quickly, but that's okay. It's fun to have a short, sweet time rather than have a crazy drawn-out thing. This adventure is easily my most favorite adventure for what it does because it does what it should be doing. 5e is about this crazy fun stuff. Make it crazy fun. Another thing to consider lining up against all the other 5e adventures is we have death and despair, and we've got, the world is ending, and the monsters are attacking, and we've got all these, depressing but heroic and crazy, high, ridiculous things. But then this adventure comes along, and this adventure is a breath of fresh air. This adventure is just so fan-freaking-tastic in that you don't have to worry about the world ending. You don't have to worry about evil monsters that are looming around. You don't have to worry about trying to find this MacGuffin that's gonna destroy the universe or whatever. No, it's just you're going to this cute little location and you're interacting with a whole bunch of awesome people. Yeah, you could say that your players could get really invested in Prismeer and really want to save the day, but Prismeer is not exactly the world, right? So it's on a much smaller scale, and I truly appreciate it for that. Now, do I recommend this adventure for everybody? No, I would say that if you're looking for a more hardcore romp into actual dungeons and actual dragons, then probably avoid this one. But if you're looking for something that is coming completely out of left field, if you're looking for something that is fun and entertaining and just a quick little adventure of sunshine and rainbows with some hags and some Jabberwockies thrown in the mix, then I'm here to tell you that Wild Beyond the Witchlight is an easy pick. I sincerely do hope that with this adventure, that this prompts people to running more whimsical games. I hope this prompts people into running shorter games. I'm hoping that this adventure shows people that There doesn't need to be a formula when it comes to creating adventures, because this adventure certainly breaks the mold. You can absolutely do things in a variety of different ways. You can go all over the place. You can do a whole bunch of various things. You don't have to get into combat. You can do so many different things, and I truly appreciate it for that. And if you appreciate all those things too, then I recommend that you stick around on this channel, because I will be covering every single location and little adventure in this book. I will be going through the entirety of this book, and I'll be going through as someone who is running this adventure, and we can make this adventure as truly awesome and as great as it deserves to be. So that's going to do it for me. Did this convince you on picking up Wildbound the Witchlight, or is this still iffy for you? Have you ever ran anything Fae related, or is this your first time diving into the whimsical nature of the Fae? And if you're buying the book physical copy, are you getting the standard copy or the alternate copy? Go ahead and tell me those things, because I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.